because I know that my colleague over here is on the run. But please, your Congresswoman, Nanette Brown. I want you to know she's doing an outstanding job in Congress. And I've enjoyed working alongside of her for these years. So, sad to leave, but I had to come home. But I know that Congress is in great hands with representatives like my daughter. So, I want to thank her for dropping by. And I saw another person. Where did Tim Mcgusty go? Where'd he go? There he is. Yolanda, when I first walked in, and I guess everybody from here knows, but just in case you didn't, the McGusker family right there, LA firefighters, goes in the family, and so another firefighter who will come to City Council. And how many days, Tim? 95? That's how many I count. Yes, we are definitely counting the days. So thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to serving you. And Yolanda, thank you so much for the invitation to come here. This is a beautiful place, and I had the honor a few minutes before we got started for her to show me around, and especially the tribute and the dedication to first responders all through the place. But the memorials that are back there, including the one to her beloved brother, I was honored that you took the time to share that with me. And I shared with you that I've been a first responder too, because for a number of years I worked at County General's Emergency Room in the trauma unit as a PI. And I see my good friend Bonnie Lowenthal. State legislature, in the state assembly, and we went through some tough times. We went through the 2008-2010 recession, where we had a $40 billion deficit in the state of California. We went from being the 5th largest economy in the world, if we were a country, to the 8th largest economy. And I know that Bonnie is jealous like I am to know that the state budget in our time was reduced. The entire state budget was reduced to $83 billion because that's how bad the problem was. Now the state budget is almost $300 billion with a surplus of $97 billion. So Bonnie, the surplus was more than our entire budget. And the reason I mention that is because it's so important to what's going on today. If we think about the 50,000 people that are sleeping on our streets every night, which is really insane that our city has come to the point where people pitch tents anywhere. That's just madness. We need to get people off the streets as soon as we can in housing, not as soon as we can, immediately. We need to address this problem just like we did in 94, and I can see a number of you were around here in 94. You remember how, when that earthquake hit and that freeway collapsed, we built that freeway back in record time, which means we can do it when we put our minds to it. And what I believe is we have to have a whole of government approach, which means the federal government is responsible, the state government, the city and the county, and for too long the city and the county have functioned like this instead of like this. It has to be joint, working together. It makes no sense to say the city's responsible for building, the county's responsible for services, when we're talking about the same individual. So we have to work together. And we got to get the federal government to relax a lot of regulations to address this problem like it is emergency, and the state government too. Let me just give you one example of regulations that make no sense in the middle of this crisis. Did you see the article in the LA Times a couple of weeks ago about how LA was given 3,000 vouchers, but has only been able to use 168? Well, in that article it said that one of the reasons why it takes so long is because if you're homeless and I have a voucher, you have to have an identification. But you've been on the streets for 5 years, you don't have an ID. And you know what, I'm going to help you get an ID. Where's it going to be mailed to because you have no address? That kind of stuff is madness. How about put somebody in housing and then help them get their documents? I'm going to So things like that, maybe they made sense 40 years ago. They make absolutely no sense in the middle of a crisis. So we have to do that. The city alone owns about 70 acres of land, lots, some of which are completely vacant. Why can't we put up housing there? We know how to do this. And I will tell you, the Congresswoman and I, one of the things we do in Congress is we go on congressional delegations overseas. And people think we're vacationing. Don't they? It's not a vacation. You know how we sightsee? They're called windshield tours. You know what that means? Look out the window from going from meeting to meeting, okay? That's the extent of our sightseeing. But we've seen what our government can do when we put our mind to it. 20,000 Afghan refugees were in Qatar. We had to build a virtual city. Did we know how to do that? Yes. Why can't we do that here at home? That's why you have to have an all-of-government approach. We have to prevent people from becoming homeless. We got to get those folks off the street right away into housing. And then we have to address why they were unhoused to begin with. What was their problem that led to them losing their housing? If we don't address why they were unhoused, the odds of them staying in housing is very slim. But because people are so pissed about this situation, the people who are unhoused now are kind of viewed as all the same. Meth addicts who want to live on the street. That's a very, very narrow view of the population. I have no doubt that there's some people like that, but that's not the overwhelming majority. And when it comes to developing public policy, you don't develop public policy based on the exceptions. You develop public policy based on the majority of the people that are there. And so I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm having a blast in this part of the campaign. We are 95 days away, and you know, I had a tough road like everybody else in the primary. When you run against somebody who $40 million is like a drop in the bucket to, it's hard for me to even conceive of that, but $40 million, I had the kitchen sink thrown at me, all sorts of negative ads. One said I've raised $11 million. No, I raised that. Have you seen $11 million?
We got a kitchen there.
Exactly. I like that. That's absolutely right. We have monthly reports. Everybody in Congress knows how much everybody's raised. Wasn't it that way on the state as well, buddy? We all knew. So anyway, after having the kitchen sink, after having millions of dollars of negative ads, on election night, I was 5 points down, and frankly, I was happy because I should have been wiped out. I raised $4 million, which was twice as much as any of my opponents. But, you know, less than 10 times as, you know, he spent 10 times as much as I did. But then as the days went by, I went from being 5 points behind to 7 points ahead. And so, what that shows me is that you can have all the money in the world, but that does not automatically mean a victory. I do believe that the power of people is more powerful than the power of the dollar. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. I'd love to have a dialogue, hear what's on your mind, and I'm just honored to have the opportunity to be here. And by the way, this is my grandson, Henry DePause, who decided he wanted to hang out with his grandma on the 15th year. And you can see how interesting it is.
How's everybody doing? I want to just chime in here and let you know that Karen understands the importance of the Port of Los Angeles, and she is going to be our great champion and partner on the port, and making sure that it's taken care of, right? And making sure that we're continuing to address supply chain issues and everything that's been happening. Now, she mentioned to you her opponent who's dropping a lot of money. That's why it's going to be so important that we can't sit back and just stay home. Outside of voting, we need to knock on doors here, especially in South Shores. As you know, this is the greatest voting area, but it's also the area where you get folks who may be on the fence, folks who maybe see ads and are going to believe what they say. You are going to be the biggest influencers when you knock on your neighbor's door and you tell them about why we need Karen to be the next mayor of Los Angeles and why they need to go out and vote for her. So besides that, I'm going to encourage you to open up your wallets and help fight back this money war. Let's help her get to 11 million. If you've given, thank you. If you can give some more, please do. It's really important to get your message out there by raising money. And I know people in this room who can knock on doors, who can write a check, who can talk to your neighbors. Please do that. Please, please do that. You can't turn on the television without seeing an ad from an opponent. And you know how you fight that back? Is you get your neighbors to know who they're voting for and to make sure that they turn out and vote. And so I just wanted to put my 2 cents in it and just make sure that you knew that she was going to be a champion for our poor. She's been a champion for foster care issues. We were talking about homeless issues, and she is going to be a leader on all these. So we desperately, desperately need her, and there's too much at stake in November. So let's do all we can. And with that, let's get you elected the mayor.
Concerns? Yes.
I have friends who are very concerned.
I'll repeat the question.
I have friends who are very concerned about who stand on police, and I really don't know them. They are very pro-police and very concerned.
Absolutely. She said she has friends that are very concerned about my position on police. They're very pro-police, so they want to know where I stand. So let me tell you where I stand. First of all, I do not and never have supported defund the police. I have been on record, on TV, radio, print, hundreds of times, because when the speaker asked me to lead the effort around the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, I worked tirelessly to pass that bill out of the House. That bill, in and of itself, provides hundreds of millions of dollars for the police. So if you did not support the police, you wouldn't support the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Ironically, I worked very closely with the Police Protective League on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We worked closely together, which was why I was surprised that they spent $4 million attacking me since we had worked so closely together. And interestingly, I worked with Rick Caruso. So Rick Caruso, we might be in a competition now, but I have respect for him, consider him a friend, called him up during the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and asked him to help me with my Republican colleagues who weren't really sure where I was coming from. And so because he had been president of the police commission, I asked for his help. And we worked together to get the bill passed. He helped me in terms of convincing some of my Republican colleagues that I was not an extremist one way or another. So that's my stand on policing. The police, like any other profession, and I told you I worked in the medical field, and one thing I believe about the medical field is that transparency and accountability is extremely important, especially when you are in a profession where you have the ability to impact whether somebody lives or dies. Transparency and accountability is really important. As a medical professional, and to me, law enforcement need to be accountable and transparent as well. So what I believe about what is happening in our city in terms of an increase in crime is that I believe in stopping the crimes of today and investing in preventing the crimes of tomorrow. So I've spent the last 3 decades looking at crime prevention strategies, and a number of strategies that I was involved in many years ago have been tested, researched, and are considered evidence-based, meaning they work. And I want to invest money in that. So in the last couple of years, we've been fortunate enough to actually be able to steer federal dollars someplace. And so in my congressional district, which goes from USC to UCLA, I've been able to steer lots of money to crime prevention programs in my district. Some areas want to have an increased police presence. In areas that want to have an increased police presence, that's exactly what they should have. What I believe, though, is that the quickest way to get cops on the beat is to get them from behind the desk. And so instead of, and I do believe we need to hire police right now, but my focus would be hiring civilians so we can get at least 300 police officers on the street right away. Hiring more police officers, absolutely. My opponent calls for hiring 1,500 officers. The problem with that is that number one, if the city attempted to do that, the city would go bankrupt. There's no way the city could afford that right now. Number two, the police department is not even able to fill the classes today. So the maximum class is about 40 people, and according to the chief, who I talk to regularly, they haven't been able to recruit more than 25 officers in a class. So when you tell voters, and I believe as an elected official, it is extremely important for me to be honest, even if people don't particularly like what I'm saying. But I can say I'm going to hire 10,000 police officers, but why would I tell you that when I know very well that I can't do that? So what I'm calling for is hiring the officers that the city can afford, which is about 400 to 500 more officers. It's based on attrition. Right now, the city has the budget to hire 9,700 officers, and we're down. It fluctuates from month to month, but we're down from 300 to 400 officers. That's where we should focus on hiring, because we're going to have a hard enough time hiring them. So if we want to get them on the beat right away, get them from behind a desk. And I do understand that not every officer that's behind the desk is able to get on the beat. Some are there because of physical injuries or whatever. But those that can should be on the street in the neighborhoods that want to see an increased police presence. At the same time, though, I want to invest money, as I said, in the crime prevention strategies and organizations. In my first year, I want to have an office of community safety where we essentially go to all the neighborhoods around the city and say, what makes your neighborhood safe? Because what makes your neighborhood safe might be different from what makes your neighborhood safe. I don't believe in one size fits all, but what I do believe is that if you define you want this, then it's my job as mayor to deliver it. And I believe that the number one responsibility for the mayor is to keep the city safe. I think there's the perception, some of it might be because of a little gender, that she's going to be soft on crime. Can she really handle it? Is she really strong enough? Can she be decisive? Bonnie, we managed the worst economic crisis that this state has experienced since the Great Depression. I have a record that you could look at. I don't think people in the state assembly view me as soft and weak.
In the middle of one of the oldest arts and cultural districts in the city. We've had art, this has been a naturally occurring arts district since the 20s and 30s. And so help us understand that you understand that the arts really mean business and inspire economic development.
Absolutely. I mean, the arts in every way. This is the entertainment capital of not just the country, but the world. So I believe that our basic problem in LA is a big difference between the rich and the poor, and that this city has become unaffordable to live in. So how do we make the city affordable? We need good paying jobs. And the arts is one of the key economic drivers in our city. But I have an idea around the arts that might be a little different. I remember like decades ago, the city was all graffitied up. What happened? It's all come back. And when I look at all the graffiti that's all over the city, it could also be art. And some of it is, but most of it's not. And I was with yesterday one of the famous muralists in our city, Judy Bacca. I don't know if you're familiar with Judy in Spark. I didn't have a chance to talk to her. We had a rally, by the way, at La Placita. It was a rally of Las Mujeres for Bass. And we're also supporting Proposition 1 to enshrine choice in our state constitution. And I want to spend some time with Judy because murals all over the city, beautiful murals, getting the young people involved who are tagging to do murals. To me, it's economic development, it's a driver, it's jobs. But we have to protect our industries, and the entertainment industry is absolutely critical, and all the ancillary businesses that are a part of it. But let me just divert for a minute and talk about small business. Small business like this business here, and as Yolanda told me the story of, she owns, well, I guess I don't know because I'm not from here, and she owns this.
Yes.
And the story of how she came to own it is a beautiful story. So one of the things that I want to do in the very beginning is have a deputy mayor for business. Because again, if our fundamental problem is income inequality and the fact that the city is unaffordable, we have to support business because to me there's only two types of jobs. You either work for the private sector, the public sector, or you're self-employed. And so to me, supporting, encouraging, and building small business is the backbone of our city, and it helps address so many other problems. So as I met with business organizations, they have told me that the city is either doesn't care about business or is hostile to business. We need to change that image around. And so I know we can go into more details about that and later. I don't want to talk to you.
And your record, your character. But it was one commercial they want me to ask you, I didn't have the answer to, about you missing votes in Congress. Can you explain that so I can let them know what really went on?
Yes, absolutely. They were very clever. I don't know if you saw those, but they are bonded. They equated to missing votes that I didn't show up for work. And I did miss votes, absolutely. I probably should have had a 100% voting record. Instead, I had a 92% voting record. But missing a vote doesn't mean you're missing work. It means you're doing other congressional duties. And by the way, we have tens of thousands of votes. And not on any given day, we can have 20, 25, it drives us crazy. But we can have lots of votes over lots of things. So it was a clever thing that is often done to members of Congress because, again, tens of thousands of votes we have. And I was looking at where I was on a couple of those days when I missed lots of votes. One time I was actually out of the country. I was in Rwanda on behalf of the Obama administration, asked me to go to Rwanda to represent the country at the 20th anniversary of the genocide in Rwanda. So yes, I missed votes. Should have had a 100% voting record instead of a 92% voting record. I made choices to do other congressional duties. I think those people that know me know not only do I work 7 days a week, but they've never known me to have a vacation, which I shouldn't brag about that. But I am going to take a vacation though. I have to before Labor Day, but I'm not known to be absent from work and hanging out on the beach. Thank you for asking that. Yes.
I'm sure you know that a week ago, we had a really horrific incident that occurred in Peck Park.
Yes.
And it seemed to have driven, if you looked at social media, this ugliness that people will get the impression that people who come to our parks, they are characterized sometimes as outsiders, and that they shouldn't be around here, and all these ugly things that San Pedro is not. San Pedro is inclusive. San Pedro is embracing. The thing that I'm finding difficult today, and something that I've alluded to in many other opportunities to say, is that the community sometimes is not asked to participate in some of the decisions that is made that affects us, like how our parks are run, how we are policed, how we are governed. And, we're not asking that we want full control, we just want to sit at the table. So could you talk a little bit about your philosophy about incorporating community and being able to help drive a community partnership with our community leaders?
Absolutely, thank you. So there are parts of our city that feel just disenfranchised. San Pedro feels disenfranchised, the San Fernando Valley does, I certainly know South LA does. And so just in terms of my philosophy about governing, I believe that when you develop policy, you go to the people that are impacted by the policy before you do the policy. You involve them in the policy. Because it's called democracy. That is the way it is supposed to work. But I really do deeply believe that, because if you do policy in that way, there could always be unintended consequences. consequences a lot if you involve the people who are the most affected. So part of what I was describing about the Office of Community Safety is an example of that. I don't want to assume that every community wants to have investment in youth programs as their approach to public safety, nor do I want to assume that every community wants to see increased number of officers. Communities have different needs. So I believe in going to those communities to find out how do they define what the problems are in the community. How do they define what they want in order to feel safe? It's a fundamental philosophy. I've used it as long as I've been in office. And by the way, one of the other raps on me is that I'm a career politician. So I just want you to know that the first time I ran for office, I was in my 50s, okay? And it wasn't like I was unemployed throughout the rest of my life before. I worked, as I told you, as a nurse. I worked as a PA. I worked for private hospitals. I did work for county. I was a nonprofit executive, founding community-based organizations. And in my 50s, decided to step up in terms of the issues that I was working on in the community and work on those issues in Sacramento and then work on those issues in Washington, D.C. And so I use that same philosophy in the community, in the legislative process. One thing I enjoy about being in the legislature, though, I consider myself a constructive disruptor. And so involving communities in the decision-making is a way of constructively disrupting the process. So Annette, Representative Balagan knows this when she mentioned that I worked on foster care. So what I did is I started a nonprofit organization, a national organization, and once a year we bring 50 to 100 foster youth to Washington, D.C. We train them how to strategically tell their story to members of Congress to influence the policy that is made. Now, why do I do that? Because this is the most vulnerable part of our community. And by the way, amongst the homeless people, a percentage of them are former foster youth. Because when foster youth turn 18 to 21, we cut them off from resources, they couch serve for a few months, and then they wind up homeless. So my focus has been on trying to prevent homelessness from two populations, one foster youth and the other people who were formerly incarcerated. When we decided to downsize the prison population, it drove me nuts because we didn't think about where they were going to go when they got out. And so a lot of people in those tents were formerly incarcerated. There's different populations that are unhoused, and it's important to understand who is unhoused, why they were unhoused, and address their specific needs. If I build housing, the housing that I put an 18-year-old in is very different than the housing that I put a 45-year-old in. An 18-year-old needs some supervision. You know, we have transitional housing, those of us who are middle class, which is everybody here, we have transitional programs for our 18-year-olds for 4 years. How do we transition them? They go to college. They live in a dorm. They have supervision. That's how you transition to adulthood. Kids without families need the exact same thing. And if they don't get it, the outcome is very poor for them. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, I just want to stay on the theme of the parks for a minute. Here in San Pedro, we have a lot of parks. And the Recreation and Park Department, they're kind of derelict in their duties. I say they lack diligence. At least that's the impression a lot of us are getting.
They lack what?
Diligence.
Diligence.
In maintaining their properties. As well as the safety of the parks, as Ray was alluding to. You know, I think the numbers were 403 parks in the city and 33 rangers, unarmed rangers. So I guess what I'm saying is, have you given any thought to how record parks can be handled? I really think it should be dismantled and rebuilt. And what about arming park rangers entirely more? I think the numbers were 33 we have now. They want to hire 60, get up to 66. But there's 403 parks. What do we do about that?
Well, our parks absolutely have to be safe, and we have to take ownership of the parks. Part of my district, as I mentioned, is in the South Central area, and in that area, we had a number of parks where the community and families could not go to because they were basically owned by bankers. And it took us a while but we had to clear them out so that we could open the parks back up for the families that deserve to be there. So whether it's hiring park rangers, whether it's increased patrols from police, whether it's different types of programming, we absolutely have to have parks for our families. So I don't know if I would go so far because, honestly, it's not my depth of knowledge in terms of parks and rec. I don't know if I would go so far to say that the department needs to be dismantled. But what I will say is that there are a number of city departments that clearly are very dysfunctional. And something needs to change. That could be a leadership change in terms of general manager. That could be a change on the commissions. That could be a change in terms of my approach to the various city departments, is I believe in metrics. What are your goals? How do you measure them? How are people performing? Not just go along to get along. I'm not somebody that subscribes to coloring between the lines if that doesn't work. So how do you constructively disrupt that process so that it does work for people in the city? And I would want to know exactly what is going on here and address the problem.
And about arming park rangers.
Army Park Rangers, I haven't given that any thought, but I will tell you, whether it's arming park rangers or increasing the presence of LAPD, I don't know the level of training and skill of park rangers to just say automatically that they should be armed. That wouldn't be very responsible. But what I do think is responsible is saying that the parks need to be protected. People need to feel safe. Make sense? Yes.
To piggyback onto the arts, we are, and Los Angeles has something that's beautiful that's created. For example, in San Pedro, we have a beautiful fountain that is now not working. So it seems to me that when we receive something beautiful is created, that means dollars to Los Angeles because people want to go where it's beautiful. It's not maintained. It's not, we don't have that fountain working that was down there by the bridge that was spectacular. And so my question to you is, how do we, it seems like when we talk about the parks, they get maintained because people rally around their park. And I meet monthly with the port as a representative from the polar bears. And they're working very hard down there in the harbor. And not only that, the maintenance people are in charge of so many parks. So I was actually impressed with the people that I met. But it ties into this idea of maintenance and how do we maintain and keep our city beautiful so that when we are so fortunate to receive something beautiful, that it's maintained and it's respected.
Absolutely. And you know what, in general, city services, whether we are talking about trash around, whether we are talking about, landscaping around that has just been left. I mean, there's so many places in the city where you just see trash just strewn on the streets. And I think in general, city services absolutely needs to be improved. Clearly, the staffing needs to increase. Those are things that need to happen throughout the city. Now, I'm saying all these things I would do. I do want to make it clear, we do have members of the city council, and I would work hand in glove with members of the city council to address the weaknesses in their areas. Whether it's resources that are lacking, and by the way, when I look at resources, I don't just look at the city budget. You're never going to be able to fund everything in the city budget. But what I found out a few years ago on a congressional level is that the city of Los Angeles leaves millions of dollars on the table, doesn't even apply for it when it comes to federal resources. So one of the things that I want to have is I want to have staff at development office, staff that do nothing but look for money to bring into the city, so that specifics like you described, the fountain that might not exist in other places, but that your member of council can go after resources specifically for that. Some people talk about robbing Peter to pay Paul with the city budget. I'm going to cut over here and fund over there. I think that you expand the pot. Instead of robbing Peter to pay Paul, I want to expand the pot. I want to look for federal resources, state resources, philanthropic resources, money specifically for the arts. There's a lot of money in this country. It's a question of strategically going after it. And as somebody who has built organizations as a nonprofit executive, I believe that we have all the money we need in this country. It's a question of going after it. And some people in some places have no problem finding it. So to me, if they can find it, I can find it.
I used to live in South Central, and we always had problems with street takeovers. And I know that Marquise took care of a lot of those issues, but now, the car street takeovers, now they're coming into San Pedro. And I'm just wondering what can be done about that. I know we have to talk to our council members. And one other question with relation to community, also being from South Central, and I know you're familiar with Vermont and Manchester. How do you prevent, I guess, the people that are in positions of power from usurping what the community wanted? Those are my questions.
Street takeovers.
Yes.
Street takeovers, I think, are horrific. I mean, I've seen the tapes of them going around in circles and young people hanging out the door. There have been several deaths, people literally falling. I mean, I think they need to be aggressively stopped. They are extremely dangerous. And they're not just here. I mean, the bridge that opened up. The bridge now is closed. Although I will tell you, I drove by the bridge earlier today and I did see traffic on the bridge. It was like a handful of cars. No, I think that is an absolute danger that has to be stopped immediately. And I would hope if people see that they hit 911. There's nothing to do about a street takeover except for to stop it the second it happens. That's not negotiable in my opinion.
So I know.
It seems like a big expense.
I know.
I mean, I think that we have to stop it the moment it happens, and then we have to prevent it. I wouldn't want to see the city invest in putting things to stop street takeovers. I wouldn't, that just seems like that would be a big expense, but I do think that has to be. You know what, it's interesting, when we started coming out of the pandemic, there's all sorts of bizarre behaviors that started. You know what, I mean, like the smash and grab, are people just walking into a place and just taking stuff? You know, I talk to the police chief pretty regularly, and one of the things that he told me about crimes that started happening after we came out of the pandemic that didn't get reported very much, and that was road rage. People came, I guess from being locked up, people kind of like lost it a little bit. It came out, you know, with really crazy stuff that has to be stopped at its inception. Fine.
Yeah, Karen, you mentioned it earlier about the issue of income inequality. And I'm sure we're all familiar with Bruce's speech and how our good friends Steve Bradford and Holly and Janice Hahn managed to work that through. Long Beach recently did a study of the history of redlining. I don't know if that study exists in the city of Los Angeles. We know it existed, probably still exists, and it's all related to income inequality. How do you address that enormous issue?
If people heard what Bonnie said, how do you address the enormous issue of income inequality? I believe we have to aggressively address it through jobs, through small business development, and I think we need to be creative. You know, for example, in a few years, the Olympics is coming to town. I had a great Zoom call with the guy that's in charge of the Olympics, and I was really excited because there's so much synergy around it, so much energy around it. The people that are involved in bringing the Olympics to town are all the kind of the movers and shakers of the city. And so they were talking about all of the small businesses that are going to be created and helped as part of the Olympics and the jobs. But a lot of times when there are job opportunities and small business opportunities, they're not targeted toward areas that actually need it the most. And usually the areas that need the jobs and the business opportunities the most don't know about it and miss the opportunity. And I think we need to strategically go after those neighborhoods where income inequality is so severe, where jobs, I mean, we might have record low unemployment, but I mean, that's a statistic that does not apply everywhere. So I want to be very proactive in in terms of addressing income inequality and strategic. And so I know that there have been studies of redlining in LA. I don't know if they've been updated because there were a lot of racial colors. When I was growing up, there were certain neighborhoods that certain people couldn't live in. I had friends where it was African American families, and the only reason they lived in those neighborhoods was because their friends who were white actually went to the meeting with the real estate broker, and the person who was selling the house didn't know who they were selling to. So that was, that's in my lifetime. It's not like it was 100 years ago. Not quite that old. Yes.
I have a question about sustainability and being more conscious of how we dispose of trash. I know you kind of mentioned about city services, but just other programs that could be more incorporated. I used to live in San Francisco, and I know that it's a much smaller footprint of an area, and so it's much easier to implement these things. But there would be something I would love to see here in LA.
About sustainability and how we do that here in LA. Absolutely. I mean, again, all of these issues are interconnected. All of them are interconnected. To our city being able to be affordable, people being able to live in neighborhoods, the fact that we need to massively increase the housing supply, and also if we're going to address homelessness, we have to prevent people from falling into homelessness. When I think about jobs, I also think about our climate goals. And I think that our climate goals can also be a way to increase small business opportunities and jobs. If we're going to green buildings, those are jobs. It's a business that's going to do that. How do we allow for places especially where the jobs are shaky, the business opportunities are small? How do we go into those areas? Because that gentrification is a real big issue. How do we prevent people from being displaced? So, last question, behind me.
Talking about environmental opportunities, you got the Port of Los Angeles over there that fails to negotiate strongly with China shipping and all the rest of those outfits trying to do with us to follow our environmental laws and clean up their operations so we're not breathing a bunch of diesel exhaust. What do you have to say about giving some muscle to the Port of Los Angeles to do the things for the community?
Absolutely. Well, you know what? I spent a great day about a week or so ago at the port and looking at it from the environmental perspective, electrification and what that means, and making sure that as the port is electrified, we don't lose jobs in the course of that. And also, the environmental issue is an international issue. And it's a national issue. So I always remind people we're so lucky to be in LA and in California where we're not really debating whether or not climate change is an issue. But understand in the world that I live in with your congressperson, it's a question as to whether climate change is actually a problem. I did speak to Secretary Buttigieg when he was in LA recently. I asked him if he would come back to the port. Because my view of the port is that, as we all know, if 40% of the goods in our country come from here, then I think that we need a whole heck of a lot more additional resources to deal with the environment. And especially in the time that we have an administration that is friendly to that issue. You should understand, in the 4 years that Trump was in office, the administration would not speak to Democrats. So 4 years, if you called anybody, they would not return their phone calls. So we have an administration now that will actually return the phone calls and believes that climate change is a problem and has a secretary that is committed to doing everything that he can. Now, at the same time, we need to keep the pressure on China. Well, we had a little hiccup on the China issue over this last week. So that might be a little delayed. If you know what I'm talking about. All else is straight. Listen, thank you so much.